He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cryptid Clues. I'm your host, Reuben, joined by your other also host, Taylor. Today, we're going to have a very wonderful analysis on some audio that we were actually sent from a friend of mine. Now, before we deep dive into this, Taylor, what is your understanding of spectral frequency analysis?
Spectral frequency analysis. Now, that's a term that I am very unfamiliar with. When I hear the term spectral, makes me think something on a different spectrum. something that's probably unobservable and something we can't detect with our eyes or with our ears, something that is beyond our frequency of detection and observation. Am I somewhere in the realm of like proximity there?
Kind of, sort of. I'll get a little bit more in depth with it here. So the study of spectral frequency, before I explain it, is actually what I used to analyze some of this audio. And I'd like to talk about that a lot because it just makes for an interesting topic when we're discussing things like Bigfoot or Sasquatch sounds, unknown cryptid sounds, or just animal sounds in general if you wanted to catalog and figure out what's what. Spectral frequency is the study of looking at sound in kind of a different light than a simple sound wave graph. Now, Taylor, you're probably familiar with seeing sound in like the very typical 2D sound waves, the thick up and down smudges on a chart, and listening to an MP3. When you're editing audio for an episode, or for our listeners, whenever you're looking at something like on your phone, you're playing an audio file, you see those little waves going up and down?
Yeah.
So spectral frequency is like slipping on sci-fi Predator vision to see those sore knee joints lighting up Arnold Schwarzenegger as he runs off into the woods.
Oh, okay. You painted the perfect picture. I see it now.
Yeah, that's how I paint it. So essentially, you get to unpack and look in depth at audio in a sliding scale of off, where everything is black. There's no sound within a range, to on, where it slowly lights up with volume the more powerful that range is. So this creates a very unique heat pattern in a low noise environment that contains a lot more information than our standard audio waves. And in a noisy environment, while it'll fill up pretty much everything, so there won't be any black in the off state, you'll see where the most powerful ranges are, enough that you can cut out and pick sound out. So it's really useful in editing to remove noise from audio and stuff like that as well. So think of a dog barking in a typical 2D wave pattern. You have like the silence at the beginning where the line is flat, and then the dog barks and you get a couple of spikes of audio. Now, dog barks are pretty thick sound, so it's going to have a big smudge to it, but essentially that's all it looks like at first glance. It's nothing super duper amazing. So if a human mimicked that dog barking, that same classic pattern could look pretty darn similar, if not exactly the same, side by side. You could probably take those two audio files, shuffle them up, and go, ooh, I don't know which one is the dog anymore. That's how your typical 2D waves work. However, spectral frequency is going to peel back that simplistic view and show so much new information. Now you could actually, at a glance, pick out which one is the dog and which one is the human without actually listening to it once you know which one is which. So specifically, it's going to show us what image that sound creates in various hertz from the highest range in whatever pitch to the lowest. So if you have those two, a human and a dog, mimic each other, You could then pick apart the differences visually, comparing those sounds and looking at the fingerprint of them, essentially. So really what this is doing is if you collect a ton of sounds, you can create a database of fingerprints for what sounds look like dog sounds, for instance. And whenever someone wants to fake pretend or practice for the next furry convention, you could slap it in a spectral frequency analysis and say, yep, that's not a dog. Sorry, I was trying not to laugh there. So basically, it just simply wouldn't line up the same. Now, humans are incapable of making certain sounds outside of certain frequencies, which is a whole separate topic. But even though our unique voices would have slightly different patterns, if we all managed to make the same sound, they could be visually similar, but they'd still be a little bit varied in a spectral frequency map that you could slap it into a human database. And then you could have that separate dog database. Now, before I move on, I'm almost done with the spectral frequency study, I promise. I know it's boring. However, something interesting that we've talked about before, which is observable in spectral frequency, is infrasound. Now, you recall that, correct? You want to talk a little bit about infrasound there, Taylor? What do you remember?
Yeah, so infrasound is basically that certain frequency that certain predators can tap into that causes the target to basically get very uncomfortable, experiencing sometimes fainting, nausea, just that your body basically shuts down and turns on you, so to speak. True terror and fear.
Exactly. So infrasound starts around 20 hertz and works its way down to as low as 0.1 hertz. It's never really observed going lower. It's definitely outside the range of human hearing, so you can't hear it, but you can feel it, and it has a psychological effect on most animals, usually resulting in freezing or feeling intense fear, kind of like you described with the vomiting and stuff. So I bring this up just to kind of get us into that territory of how important it is that we can observe that these frequencies exist. Because without something like spectral frequency, how would we have figured out that infrasound was a thing? You just go, oh, tigers make scary sounds, and it makes people feel scared. But then you can take those sounds that make people scared and go, because there is infrasound observable on every single one of these recordings, we can then say that this is most likely responsible for creating that fear factor in people. So spectral frequency is commonly used during studies of audio to figure these things out, and has been used already to catalog a ton of different Bigfoot and Sasquatch sounds. So it's quite interesting to take people's recordings and audio and compare it to what little database we have of unknown audio to kind of determine, could this be something Bigfoot or Sasquatch, or is it a dog barking or a person trying to mimic a Sasquatch? So moving on from this, it was some time ago that a friend of mine reached out to another friend who had some experiences and let them know, hey, Cryptid Clues exists. They might be interested in hearing what you've recorded. So this comes from a person who is a big hunter fisher, and it was just recently in the Okanagan area last September that this audio was recorded around 4 a.m. Now, this is going to come from somebody named Tyler, who submitted this audio kindly towards us, and I was able to follow up and give him a private little analysis of this whole thing, which I'd like to unpack for this episode now. So, Taylor, if you would, are you able to pull up that recording right now?
Yes, I have the original, and then I have your revised one. Would you like the original first?
Please.
Okay, here we go.
That is some spooky audio, hey?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's terrifying.
If I heard that at 4 a.m., I would be booking it. Now, I played this audio for a couple of fishing and hunting friends of mine Tyler himself is a big hunter and fisher and says that in all of his years, he's never heard this before. He has no clue what it is. I played the audio for someone that I know that does a lot of fishing and a lot of hunting. And they said, hey, I haven't heard anything like that. I've heard bears and stuff, little baby bears even that sound like little kids laughing when they're in the woods when I'm hunting up in a tree stand. But I've never heard that. That does sound different. I also played the audio file for somebody else that I met that is a big fisherman, goes out, does a ton of fishing and stuff, and actually had a couple of Sasquatch experiences themselves that they've shared with me, but haven't given me permission to share anything yet. And they said, listening to this audio, that it's quite similar to something that they heard once before during what they thought could have been a Bigfoot encounter. A little bit different, but kind of in that same range and that same kind of like hair-raising feeling when listening to it. Now, out here in the Okanagan, we've got tons of animals and stuff like that. So these hunters hear a lot of sounds. Fishermen hear a lot of sounds. And if we take kind of what we have and run it through spectral frequency, we can compare a lot of the species that we have here in the Okanagan to this audio recording. Now, I want to put it out there that as far as a moose or a bear goes, moose have a very unique scream. They can get pretty close to that sound, but spectral frequency, they'll look quite different. Same with a bear. They don't really sound like that. If anything, the sound that we just listened to audibly is closer to wolf on steroids screaming or something like that. Not like a typical howl, but like a very hoarse howl, almost like it's trying to but can't. It's audibly maybe the most similar comparison I could make to the species that we have, or a cougar screaming. As far as a visual image goes, spectral frequency will show that a cougar actually lights up to be quite close to the sound, but is clearly out of range. So when I talk about range, and Taylor, you've seen these images and stuff that I shared with you via email, but
Yes.
Coyotes and dogs and stuff, just for our listeners, have a very unique visual pattern. And I want you to imagine a nice, bright, horizontal line going across the screen. And from a range of, I think it's about 4,000 hertz, that's kind of where like the dog starts, down to a range of, I want to say it's like 500-ish. You'll see that these lines kind of echo each other and go all the way down with some big gaps in between them. A coyote has the same range as a dog, but also extra at the very top with quite a few more lines than a dog has. So you can take coyote sounds and dog sounds and differentiate between them, because coyotes have several more layers built on top of their sound, which is quite unique. Wolves, on the other hand, have less layers than a dog and a whole bunch of horizontal lines that spread out quite a bit. They're quite thin in comparison to a dog. And they have around the 1,000 mark down to the 500 mark. That's kind of where they go. I'm sure we can post some images or something on the blog for people to take a peek at later. When it comes to completely different animals, foxes have a very unique pattern in that they don't have horizontal lines. They have vertical lines, which is super trippy to look at. So when you think about how different this can be from your standard wave file, fox having crazy vertical spikes with empty gaps in between is insane. It's weird. Bobcats also have a nice curved line, cougars, etc. Owls are very thick. But this is all boring information to just listen to on a podcast. It's really something to look at visually. So we'll have to upload something for our listeners to take a peek at so they can kind of see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it'll be on the YouTube version too. So they'll be up overlaying as you're mentioning these things. And then, yeah, as you said, the blog will sneak these photos in there for people to visually see.
Yeah. Now, kind of for an overall summary of this range, none of these sounds that I mentioned really go below 400 to 300. Human voice can, but it looks quite different. It isn't going to go much below that mark. Now, going on to the recording that we were sent, its range starts around the 1,000, 1,500 mark. Very softly, you can see some lines start to appear. And then it goes all the way down to about 400-ish. So the lower end of where the wolf and the dog are. And then it's a lot of noise below that you can no longer see. It kind of loses those lines around the 200 mark. You can't see anymore. So there's just too much noise in this recording to really pick up anything else, especially infrasound. It's too far away to hear that, or sorry, to see that. But at this point, there's enough of a pattern to compare it visually to the common culprits, like a cougar or a wolf. And it looks nothing like those. So I cleaned up the file. I removed all of that stuff because you can just go right into spectral frequency and you can highlight and select and draw over it and black it out. And I left only those lit up parts where you hear the screams. So we can make a much cleaner version of it. And Taylor, feel free to play that file now if you have it prepared.
I got it right here. I realized actually it was probably looping there for I thought it was just going. But yeah, that's the cleaned up version that you did.
Yeah, I cut out all the extra sounds in there. The sound of like there's like a door or something opening at the beginning. That's like a big vertical line. I can't cut out anything vertical, but I did trim that out because it was before the sounds played. There's a clock ticking in the background, so those vertical lines are still there, unfortunately. But it's really nice to have that for visual comparison because other Bigfoot screams and stuff, which you can find over on the Thinker Thunker YouTube channel, he has a bunch of spectral frequency comparisons. He plays some mystery howls, and visually, our recording that we've gotten here looks very similar to the mystery howls, which are potential Sasquatch recordings. So much so that if you look at them side by side, well, they kind of look exactly the same. I really want to say that if we look at bobcat and cougar, they're visually quite a bit different from these so-called mystery howls that Thinker Thunker ran through spectral frequency. This recording looks almost exactly like those. What do you think, Taylor?
I mean, the bobcat cougar ones, they just seem more sporadic, where these mystery howls seem much more linear. And then, of course, the one that was submitted to us, I mean, absolutely. It just seems, it kind of, I could see maybe being in between, but it's not anywhere near as sporadic as the bobcat or the cougar or anything like that. And it resembles the mystery howls for sure. It's quite something, actually. And I'm glad that you ran it through this type of analysis and you're able to explore this.
Comparing it to something like a wolf as well, wolves have those really thin, long lines, and the way that those go up, all the way up through like the 1,500, 2,000 mark, this just doesn't have that. It's low. It's really, really low, and it's quite thick.
Yeah, it really, really is.
It's like comparing a big toe to a long finger. I don't know how else to say that.
Yeah, it's quite eerie.
But yeah, honestly, there are frequencies below this that, I mean, it's possible for something like a cougar. It's not quite arched enough to be a bobcat, but it's very similar to those mystery howls we're talking about. Does this mean it's a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch? No. I mean, the real answer is left to our imagination. It's unfortunate that until we actually have proper visual confirmation of Bigfoot or Sasquatch, or one makes the news that the entire world gets to see, we're not going to develop a database of these things to compare it to and say, well, that's a Bigfoot. Because you'd have to have a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot come up to a microphone. We know it's there. We know it's speaking into it. It's being recorded and goes, wow, cool. This is what I sound like. We actually have something to compare to now that is confirmed 100% to be Sasquatch. These are just screams in the woods. We can compare them to other screams in the woods, but what they come from, scientifically, we don't know. Theoretically, however, I would love to say that this is potentially a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, and much, much less likely to be a wolf on steroids or a moose or a bear or something like that. Could it be a moose or a bear? Absolutely. I'm not saying it's not. But the likelihood of it being those things, it's a little bit lower since we have a database of what those sound like. We have reference to all the different sounds they can make, and it doesn't look the same on spectral frequency. It can sound the same, but visually it doesn't quite line up, which just opens the door for that Scooby-Doo mystery of wanting to pull the mask off on this wave file.
You make a great point there. And when I first heard this audio, I started to think, oh, it has some subtle similarities to a moose or a deer that make most people probably think that, okay, a moose and a deer, if you aren't really out and about too much, that they make a specific type of noise. But let me tell you, just Google or YouTube what type of sounds that these animals make. It's quite something, and you wouldn't expect it. It's crazy. And anyone that's out in the woods hiking, and they don't usually go out hiking too much, and you hear that noise, you would be terrified. But again, it could be just a deer, it could be a moose. Hence, that's why I suspected maybe that's the case here. But looking at your evidence and looking at your examination, we can see that, okay, this is more along the lines of being something else. But to your credit as well, yeah, we don't have that foundation, that evidence of what Bigfoot sounds like, so we can't match it to anything. It's just, as labeled in the image here, mystery howls. That's all it can be classified as, right?
Exactly. Like finding fingerprints out in the woods and going, this is too big to be a human fingerprint, but we don't have the suspect to get the fingerprints from. So you can't say that's where this came from.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
That's what I love about spectral frequency, is it's the fingerprint of audio.
So were you aware of it before you tuned into Thinkerthunker's video? Or was that something you learned about after the fact?
I've played around in Adobe Audition in the past to find spectral frequency. I didn't fully understand it or its use until I did see Thinkerthunker's video, and I was like, oh, that's actually really neat. I didn't know you could use it this way. And then looking into it, I found out, well, that's why it's used typically. Outside of editing to help clean up noise and stuff manually without just using a basic filter, that's typically what spectral frequency is for. Or if you're listening to, you're editing music or something like that and you want to really clean up your sound, that's a good way to do it too. You can take a look at it visually.
Interesting. I like that. Well, again, I'm glad that you're able to run it through and figure this out and make these comparisons, because it's something that people definitely are not well informed of. And I'm curious how many other cryptid explorers out there or researchers employ this type of technique, because it doesn't seem like it gets really mentioned too often outside of just them looking at your classic wavelength of an audio clip, right?
Right. This is the thermal image of video recordings, essentially. If you want to go record something out in the woods and have a blurry video, fine, but you could also use a thermal camera to show, wow, this entire thing is hot. It's not just a person in a cold suit. Anyways, that's all I have for my topic on spectral frequency. The good news is I might be able to get some more recordings and take a closer peek at them if our contact allows. That would be absolutely fantastic. For anyone listening, if you have any audio recordings or things you'd like me to analyze that are potentially cryptid related, I'd love to listen to them. First and foremost, I'd love to pick them apart, second most, and I'll share all that information with you too, if allowed. Reach out to us at CryptidClues@gmail.com. Taylor, I'll let you do the rest of the plugs there because I am tired and drained of caffeine.
Sounds good. Ladies and gentlemen, our social media channels, X, formerly Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, we're on Patreon, and you can find us, well, you already said it, Gmail, and our website, CryptidClues.ca. That's basically everything. And I've been so excited to just be able to listen to your analysis, because in closing here, when you responded and you just put this deep dive, detailed email full of information back with the imagery and everything like that, I was just blown away. I was like, oh my gosh, okay. And so when I was at work or going to work, when I saw it, I had to wait all day and finally get my lunch break, and I was scoping through it, thought, oh, this is great, this is fantastic. And so I really appreciate your attention to detail, and I'm sure that he does too. The fact that he's just thinking, oh, I'll just send in this clip to this show, but no, I mean, the amount of information that you pulled and were able to kind of maybe reaffirm or clarify something for him. It's just, it's nice when you have a little piece of evidence and you can see it explored. And again, we're not experts, but you are very capable with the tools that you have, and those tools have helped shed some light on something that was pretty inexplainable for this individual, and that's fantastic.
Thank you. Oh, I appreciate that. I'm glad it gave you excitement too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I mean, more people that send in some more clips, as you said, Reuben. Yeah, you'll dissect it and analyze it and research it for anyone that does so, and I will be super stoked to read into it. And we'll do more episodes on it if you're happy with it being shared on as an episode, and we can talk about it too. So that's good. But yeah, I will stop rambling. Thank you again, Reuben, for joining. Thank you everyone for listening. Take care and stay safe.
Bye bye.